Welcome to Vale of Shadows, Book 1, The Amulet of Shadows.
By Marie Mayer.
Chapter 2, The Hidden Study. The kettle had long since gone quiet. Elara let the tea steep too long and drank it anyway. It tasted bitter, metallic at the back of her tongue, as if the morning's wrongness had followed her inside and settled into the water. She stood at the kitchen table with both palms braced against the wood and stared at the wall opposite, where sunlight crept slowly across faded wallpaper patterned with climbing ivy. The house was still. It always had been. Even when her mother had filled it with soft music and murmured incantations and the scratch of pen against paper, the manor had never been loud. It seemed to absorb sound rather than echo it. Now, with only Elara's footsteps and the ticking clock for company, the silence felt heavier, layered. She flexed her right hand again. The thin cuts from the sprites had closed into pale lines. No swelling, no lingering burn. If she hadn't seen the claws, she might have convinced herself she'd brushed against bramble. But bramble didn't freeze midair when told to stop. She pushed away from the table. There were practical things she could do. She could walk the boundary again. She could mark the edge of the blight with chalk. She could fetch salt and lay a circle along the hedges. She could pretend this was something small. Instead, she found herself standing in the hallway outside her mother's old study. The door remained closed, as it had for years. Not locked. She had long ago discovered that her mother had never been one for obvious barriers, but shut with a kind of finality that had kept Elara from crossing the threshold more than once or twice since her disappearance. The brass handle was cool beneath her fingers. "You're being dramatic," she muttered to herself. The woods had rotted overnight. Sprites had drawn blood. A symbol that made her ribs tighten had been carved into a stump at the edge of her land. Dramatic seemed insufficient. She turned the handle. The door opened without resistance. The study smelled like paper and lavender and old dust. The scent struck her harder than she expected. It was as if someone had uncorked a bottle of memory and poured it directly into her lungs. The curtains were half drawn, letting in a pale wash of light that fell across the writing desk beneath the far window. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Leather-bound volumes, cloth spines faded to soft browns and greens. A few newer texts interspersed like bright notes in an old melody. Nothing had been moved. Elara stepped inside and closed the door behind her, not out of secrecy, but instinct. The house seemed to exhale as the latch clicked into place. She crossed to the desk. Her mother had kept it orderly. Quills cleaned and laid straight. Ink bottles stoppered. Papers stacked and tied with ribbon. The last letter she had written before vanishing had remained tucked beneath a paperweight for months afterward, until Elara had finally gathered the courage to fold it and place it in a drawer. Now the desk held only a thin film of dust and a small brass key she did not recognize. Elara frowned. The key lay near the inkwell, half hidden by shadow. It was simple, no ornate bow, no decorative ridges, just a small, old-fashioned key, tarnished at the edges. She was certain it had not been there before. Her pulse ticked up. Slowly, as if the movement might startle the room itself, she reached out and picked it up. The metal was warm. Not warm from sunlight. The desk was in shadow, but warm as if it had been held recently. The sensation lingered in her palm, unsettling and intimate. "Don't," she murmured, though she wasn't sure whether she was speaking to herself or to whatever invisible logic might be guiding the day. She turned, scanning the room. Her gaze drifted to the tall bookcase along the left wall. The third shelf from the bottom sagged slightly under the weight of several thick volumes. She had always assumed it was simply age. Now she noticed something she hadn't before. The shelf's back panel sat a fraction forward compared to the others. She crossed to it, key clenched lightly in her hand. The books were titles she recognized: herbals, histories of coven lineages, treatises on veil theory. She slid them aside one by one, stacking them carefully on the floor. Behind them, pressed flat against the back of the shelf, was a small keyhole. Her throat tightened. The wood around it bore faint scratches, as if a key had been guided there many times. Elara stared at the brass key in her hand. "You're late," she whispered to the empty room, a tremor of something like accusation threading through the words. Then she knelt and slid the key into the lock. It fit. For a heartbeat, she considered leaving it at that. Proof enough that her mother had hidden something, that there were layers to this house she had never fully explored. But the image of the carved crown flared behind her eyes, sharp and unyielding. She turned the key. The lock clicked softly. The back panel of the shelf shifted inward with a faint groan. Elara pressed her fingers against it and pushed. The panel swung open on concealed hinges, revealing a shallow compartment carved into the wall. Inside lay a single book, not large, not ornate. It was bound in dark green leather, the edges of its pages uneven and faintly gilded. No title marked the spine, no sigil adorned the cover. It looked, at first glance, almost ordinary, but the air in the compartment felt different, denser. Elara reached toward the book and hesitated just before touching it. The same sensation she had felt in the clearing brushed her ribs, anticipation, like a held breath. She wrapped her fingers around the spine and lifted. The leather was soft from handling, the edges worn smooth. As she drew it free from the compartment, the room seemed to narrow slightly, the quiet sharpening into something expectant. She stood and carried the book to the desk. The cover bore no clasp, yet when she tried to open it, the pages resisted. Not locked exactly, but reluctant. She swallowed. "This is ridiculous," she murmured again, though her voice had gone thin. She set her left hand flat against the cover and let her right hover above the edge of the first page. The faintest memory stirred, her mother's voice, patient and steady. "Magic is not a thing you take. It is a thing you ask." Elara closed her eyes. "I'm not here to command," she said softly. "I just need to understand." The resistance eased. She opened the book. The first page was blank. She frowned and flipped to the second. Blank. Third. Blank. A ripple of irritation flared. She had not unearthed a hidden compartment to stare at empty parchment. She turned another page and stopped. Ink bloomed beneath her gaze. It did not appear all at once. It seeped up from the fibers of the page like water rising through cloth, forming letters slowly, deliberately. Elara's breath caught. The words shaped themselves in her mother's careful script. "If you are reading this, the amulet has stirred." Her heart stuttered. She leaned closer, afraid the ink might fade if she moved too quickly. More words formed. "Do not seek it out in fear. It answers blood and balance both. If it wakes before you are ready, it will not forgive haste." Elara's mind snagged on a single word. Amulet. She flipped forward, pages whispering under her fingers. More ink rose where her skin brushed the paper. Diagrams of circles within circles. Notes in the margins about resonance and restraint. Small sketches of what looked like jewelry. Pendants suspended from chains, each drawn with meticulous care. On one page, a detailed rendering of a pendant caught her eye. It was oval, the surface smooth, with faint etchings that curved like smoke along its face. No crown, no jagged points, only flowing lines that seemed to loop inward toward a central stillness. Beneath the drawing, a single line formed. The amulet of shadows was not made to rule. It was made to counter. Elara's skin prickled. Counter what? She turned the page. A symbol filled the next spread. A circle, broken at the top. Inside it, 3 pointed shapes like a crown, pinned downward by a line. The same mark she had seen burned into the stump. Her breath left her in a slow, controlled exhale. No, she whispered. The ink continued to form beneath her gaze. The crown fractures what it cannot hold. The amulet distributes what it is given. One gathers, the other releases. The words were steady, unhurried, as if her mother had written them yesterday. Elara pressed her palm flat against the page. "Where is it?" she demanded softly. "Where is the amulet?" The paper warmed under her touch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, faintly, the ink shifted. A new line emerged beneath the last, beneath the place where roots meet stone. Her mind leapt at once to the grove, the ancient heart of the forest beyond the clearing. But the next words clarified. Beneath your own threshold, where shadow rests longest. Her gaze snapped toward the study door, the threshold, the manor. She looked down at the book again. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why is it waking now?" The ink hesitated this time, as if uncertain. Then, because something else has begun to rise. The room felt smaller. Elara closed the book gently, though her pulse had begun to race again. The carved crown in the clearing, the pulse beneath the soil, the hostile sprites, and now this. She stood slowly, the book still in her hands, and crossed back to the bookcase. The hidden compartment gaped open behind the removed volumes, a dark rectangle in the wall. She did not return the book to its hiding place. Instead, she set it on the desk and looked down at the floorboards beneath her feet. The threshold where shadow rests longest. The manor's foundation was old stone, older than the house itself, according to local stories. The previous structure had burned generations ago, leaving only the cellars and part of the foundation intact. The current manor had been built atop those bones, beneath your own threshold. Her gaze drifted toward the study's hearth. The stonework there was darker than the rest of the room, smoke-stained and cool. The shadow pooled deepest at its base, where the hearth met the floor. Elara stepped toward it, the boards creaking softly under her weight. She crouched and pressed her palm flat against the stone. Cold, ordinary. But beneath that, a tremor. Faint, subtle, easy to dismiss, except she had felt something like it before, in the clearing, under the stump. A pulse. Her breath slowed. She let her hand rest there longer, closing her eyes. The house seemed to lean inward around her. The quiet deepened, thickened, as if listening. And then, a vibration moved through the stone, not enough to rattle, not enough to crack, but enough that her bones registered it unmistakably. Something beneath the manor answered her touch. Elara opened her eyes slowly. The hearth looked unchanged. The study smelled of lavender and dust. Sunlight still lay in a pale strip across the desk where the grimoire waited, open to a page bearing a crown-shaped sigil. Thank you for listening to The Amulet of Shadows. The story continues in the next chapter. Until then, may the balance hold.